our resolution resolve society needs the influence of men's aggression. I like that we put a positive framing in the affirmative. We started this through a discussion of masculinity, men, what do we expect from men? And through that framing of questions about toxic masculinity. And I think everyone was curious, well, if there's worry about toxic masculinity, we may disagree about whether it exists or what it is. What we're most interested in is, what is the alternative? Where do people find positive or healthy examples of masculinity, especially when they see different models of what it means to be a good man? So I'm hoping that we'll both kind of have speeches talking about society as a whole, and also speeches that give us really concrete examples of what you've seen in your life of good men and what made them distinct to you, what you're calling other people to. Because I find at Brave for Angels, we most often find that when we're in conflict because we're pursuing conflicting goods. And I think it's good to hear people's positive cases for what they want. So with all that said, please remember to chat your whips as you have ideas for speeches or want to speak. But I would love to launch into our first speaker. We have 4 people queued up, and then we're going to open it to the room as a whole. May I have our first speaker in the affirmative, Mr. Perilliat? You have 4 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
You are muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I work with a lot of men in San Quentin State Prison, and this topic comes up a lot. When we talk about man and versus male, a lot of males think just because they were biologically a male that they're a man. And things have changed as far as male and man and masculinity, where, my dad used to be the breadwinner. He was the one that took care of the house, and he went and hunt for jobs and did things. And so he was respected as the man of the house. Well, things have changed now, and this society looks at things differently, because now women are more independent. They go out to work, and so they probably make more money than a man does, and that does question a man's masculinity. It questions his identity, which is a real major issue that I'm seeing among men. And when this does happen, then the women sometimes will say, well, you need to be a man. Well, I think men are confused about 3 things. One is male versus man, masculinity, and sexuality. And so these things are some things in question of, what does it really mean to be a man, and how do I represent myself and my masculinity? And sometimes we can be confused and upset because we're not what we would want to be, or we didn't have really good role models. I think that identity comes from a father, and a lot of us didn't have fathers growing up. And if we didn't, they probably didn't show us what it really meant to be a man, or even express to us what masculinity is. And so communication is a big thing as well. My dad, when he was growing up and he went to work, he came home, he didn't communicate. Well, in this generation, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be vulnerable, which most men don't do. You have to have empathy, which most men don't do. We have to be transparent. We don't like to be transparent because it's supposed to be a sign of weakness. And if we would share that side, then you would say, I'm less than masculine. So then we come with this aggression where we have to show that we're something that we're not, because that's what society says who we are. And so this is some things that can I want to open up the conversation, because I'm seeing there's different age groups here, and some can relate to this masculinity from 40 and up, and then the ones from 40 below, they won't understand because they're still struggling with that masculinity and what it means to be a male and a man in that sense.
Mr. Perilliat, you have been under time setting us a brave example. I would like to take probably 2 questions. I'll take the first from Mr. Boatwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stuart, I heard you talk about these roles of masculinity and manhood and how they've changed. What are some of the tools that you use at Man to Man to help the men you deal with, whether they're incarcerated or they're at-risk youth or they're junior college students? What tools do you try to teach them so that they can actually express their manhood in a positive way?
That's a very good question. First thing we do is we like to take them through a class called Men and Emotions and allow them to understand that everything is not based on emotions, but you have to understand how to communicate and how to deal with your emotions and how to effectively communicate and how to effectively listen. Because if you're not effectively listening, then you're going to have miscommunication, which leads to conflict. And a lot of times the conflict leads to domestic violence. So we're teaching them how to manage their anger, how to effectively communicate, and how to take their emotions out of the situation, which is very difficult because we as men are emotional beings.
Thank you. And for one further question, Mr. Brown, Tyshawn Brown, if you'd unmute and ask your question.
Thanks. Oh, sorry. This may be a little a tad bit redundant, but I think it's very important to ask. How are we defining men's aggression exactly? Like an example would be helpful. What constitute as aggression in this context?
Is that question to me or?
It is to you, and
chair.
I'd love to hear it too. I think we'll often want to hear people's examples of what they're thinking of concretely as aggression on either side of the resolution.
For me, it goes into that emotional piece that I'm talking about, and you hear people say that we as men are real aggressive and we're just manly and we don't know how to turn it off. We only have an on switch and an off switch, but a lot of times that's not true. I think we may be expressing our aggressive because we're annoyed, because we really are not where we want to be, or we don't really understand who we are. And so it comes out as aggressive, but really we're not very aggressive. It's just, I think it's us demonstrating our frustration, if you would. And so I think one of the things for us to do is to be able to articulate how we feel so that it wouldn't come out as aggressive, or being able to express ourselves in a way that would not be aggressive, if that answers the question. I'm not sure.
Thank you so much. Let's all thank Mr. Perriott for an excellent first speech. All right. Our next speech will come from Mr. City in the negative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to start with sharing something I read recently. In April of 1955, not long before his death, Albert Einstein sat down with an editor from Life magazine and his son. And it was actually the son who had asked Einstein, based on his reputation, his experience, for some guidance about how to live his life. And Einstein said, he said, "Try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value. He is considered successful in our day who gets more out of life than he puts in. But a man of value will give more than he receives." And I think that's really telling, to define our value. And this, I believe, applies to all humans, not just men, but especially in this case, in this conversation about men, that our value is more about what we put in than what we take out. Now, the resolution tonight is that society needs the influence of men's aggression. And I think embedded within this resolution is a number of questions. First and foremost is, do we need aggression at all? Is aggression something that's essential to society? And then the second would be, are men inherently or uniquely aggressive? And then, of course, is that also necessary? To start with the first question, I think it's really important to distinguish between aggression and strength. I think that men, women, all people need and depend upon strength for survival, to thrive. I don't think, though, that we should conflate the two. I believe that, sort of going back to the words of Einstein, aggression is more along the nature of what you take, aggression about taking from others. Strength can manifest in other ways. Strength can be about what you give. And just to take sort of a hypothetical example, if you think of two kids, a bully and his victim, and day after day, the bully comes and beats up the other kid. The bully is acting out of aggression, but I don't know that I would characterize it as strength. The kid who keeps getting beat up and yet miraculously still shows kindness and compassion to his peers and even to the bully himself is the one who's exhibiting a special kind of strength. And that really is, I think, what we should be looking for, what we should be celebrating. I don't believe society needs more aggression. I think we've seen a long history of aggression that almost inevitably ends in violence and bloodshed and rarely moves us forward as a species. I think we have the opportunity to embrace strength in men, in all people. And I do think that men may have a unique and inherent strength to offer. Now, this doesn't mean that men are not inherently aggressive. I've read through a number of studies that say, yes, there are some inherently aggressive characteristics that seem to be built into men, but we still have free will. We still have the choice whether to act on those instincts, to act on that part of genetics, or whether to strive to be better. And to me, and I think to a lot of people, that should be the essence of being human, is to be better, to try each generation to turn this world into a better place, to be better than the generation before, to give back more than just to take. And I think now's the time to start.
Thank you so much, Mr. City. I cannot resist taking the first of two questions for myself. Mr. City, you talked about men having to overcome a natural aggression. Is there something women have to overcome that's natural to them and is a bigger challenge for them in the way that aggression can be for men?
I mean, I feel a bit presumptuous answering this question because I am not a woman, so it would be difficult for me to say. I mean, the first parallel that comes to mind is that women, do have a certain, I guess you call it maternal, nurturing aspect built into their genetic code. It's part of the survival of our species, the idea, to propagate, have children and nurture them. More and more women, though, are choosing not to have children, to shift their focus elsewhere. And there's been blowback against that, but I actually think, for a number of reasons, that's a great thing. I think we should be supporting women choosing how they want to live their lives, that their only role isn't just to have children and to raise them, but to do what they want. I think that's something that I plan on teaching my daughters, and I hope a lot of other men would do the same for their daughters.
Thank you so much, Mr. City. I'll give the other question to Ms. Pascal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the chair to the speaker, does the speaker feel that domination is linked with aggression, so that in being aggressive is seeking to dominate? And if that's so, then is it men's natural inclination to want to dominate?
I think that's one way to put it. I think the way I approached it was that there's a distinct difference between aggression and a sense of defense or protection. Acting aggressively or even violently out of a sense of protecting one's family, one's loved ones, or protecting a higher ideal is not the same as acting aggression. I would say, to me, yes, there is an element of a desire to dominate built into the concept of aggression. And that's why I think it really doesn't have much to offer.
Thank you so much. Everyone, please thank Mr. City for his speech and his responses. Our next speaker of our four prearranged speakers before it opens the room is Ms. King in the affirmative of resolved society needs the influence of men's aggression. Ms. King, make sure you're unmuted so we receive the benefit of your speech.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a woman in a predominantly male field. I have 2 daughters and 3 sons, all in their 30s. Yet I knew my sons would grow up in a world I would never quite understand, the world of men. When I was a new mother a long time ago, I was told the differences were all culturally driven. I don't believe that anymore. Obviously, there is a wide range of men and women, but I believe there is a fundamental difference in attitude. And I hope that as a society, we value the contributions of men. And we also need to respect that over the course of millennia, men evolved to do what they do, to strive, to compete, to be the very best they can be, and to measure that by their own place at the finish line. I remember when my daughter was 11 months old and walking, I visited a friend whose son was 13 months old, not walking and not even trying. He saw her, a smaller child, walking and immediately started trying. That day, he was walking the next day. Later, when my son at age 4 found a wrench and took the training wheels off his bike, he taught himself to ride without them. The first kid in the neighborhood to do so, he created an uproar. Every boy in our friend group, most were 2 or 3 years older, ran home and demanded that their parents teach them to ride without training wheels today. The masculine competitiveness, I'm confident life would move forward more slowly, and I'm glad I live in the 21st century, not the 16th. Without competition, we would still believe that, and by competition, I mean a drive to compete. We would still believe that running a 4-minute mile was beyond human possibility. Then one formerly crippled man, Bannister, beat it. He'd been told he would never walk, but he wasn't satisfied to just walk or even run. He wanted to be the fastest man in the world. And suddenly everyone knew that a 4-minute mile was possible. Now it isn't even local news, but that's what men do. They test the limits. They strive to be the best, whether individually or as a team. They see something that works and has worked just fine for years. And they say, but I can make it faster and bigger and stronger, and I can make it the best in the world. And they bring that into everything they do, including science and technology. So even if it's the world's best restored 57 Chevy or prevailing at Dungeons and Dragons or sports, the male urge to compete is important to human progress. Culture may need to direct male energy sometimes. It can be overdone, just as nurturing can be overdone, but we would be worse off without it. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ms. King. All right. I'd love to take 2 questions for her. First up, Mr. Dembo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to the speaker, you spoke quite a bit about the competitive nature of men. I'd like to know if you're distinguishing between what you would define as competition versus what we might typically think of, or some of the other speakers spoke about, aggression.
I think that they are different facets. If you read a longer description of the whole question, it involved competition as well. And in a sense, trying to compete means sometimes trying to dominate, sometimes trying to climb over somebody else, however you do it. And I do think it's a drive. And as far as whether it's aggression, one of the things I thought about a lot this week was football. In the early 1900s, football was an extremely dangerous sport. There were no helmets, there were no shoulder pads, I don't think, and a lot of people died. And yet, the two of the very strongest football teams in the United States were Carlisle Indian School and the Haverford Quaker School. 2 situations where people had, where culture and society had strongly encouraged men, don't compete, don't try, don't push, and you can't stand up for yourself. It's against the Quaker rules, and as they were enforced by non-Indians, it was against the Carlisle Indian School rules. And so when they got a chance, after being sort of pushed down like that, the Quaker boys and the Native American boys basically were the top of the charts in football. At the time, it was the most physical, and I think that was a reaction to people trying to affect male nature. That's okay.
Thank you so much, Ms. King. That having been a very fascinating but slightly longer answer, I'll just stick with one question for you for right now. I really appreciated the worked example. I'm going to sometimes moderate questions up and down based on how much time they take. So I'm going to move to our next speaker after a quick round of applause hands for Ms. King. And I really appreciate the specificity. I think it's always easier to engage with. Our next speaker in the negative is Ms. Dreyer.
Hello. So I am opposing this statement, and I do not believe that society needs men's or women's aggression because of the way I define aggression. Society definitely needs the male energy. Assertiveness is how I differentiated them, aggression versus assertiveness. And we need the very many positive qualities of men, but I had an aggressive, sometimes to the point of violent father, and I've been married for 30 years to a man who is not, he's very much a man's man in a certain way, but without aggression. And my father actually appeared less strong. I felt like he had a lot of weaknesses and that he would succumb to them and become aggressive because of those weaknesses. And I feel sad for him, but there wasn't the same kind of respect that I have for my husband, who doesn't mean that there isn't anger or there aren't all kinds of other emotional issues happening, but he works internally with them. So the two of us have studied martial arts for over 25 years. And in martial arts, well, there's this concept in martial arts that there are two forces. And when one force is coming at another, you do not want those two forces. You don't want to meet that force with another force. In martial arts, what you want to do is when a force comes at you, you sort of move away so that force sort of dissipates and actually comes out of balance and out of a central harmony. And that's the way you win. You don't win with force, you win with finesse. And there's another way of dealing with two forces in martial arts, and that you create a third force. So you have first force, second force, and there's a third force. And what the third force does is it gains perspective. It's sort of the higher ground that sees what's going on with each force. So that higher perspective sort of then looks at the total picture and tries to work with that total picture. And so there's compromise, and there's basically they're seeing things from a new perspective rather than just using aggression. Aggression, again, in martial arts, what really matters is the energy with which you come at something. And when you come at something, whatever kind of energy you use, you create more of it. So if you go out with aggression, there's a tendency to create more aggression. Whereas if you go out energetically or if you stand just strong within yourself. So there's nothing wrong with standing strong in your own viewpoint. But when you're just simply standing strong and centered within yourself, you can be more open to other viewpoints. And that can give you that perspective. So I don't think aggression is necessary in society.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dreyer. I particularly appreciate it because I've studied two martial arts, which are at the opposite ends of the spectrum on the perspective on this, which are Aikido and Krav Maga.
Well, Yeah, originally, the deep martial arts are the internal martial arts, the original Tai Chi and Qigong, the original ones were very much an internal practice.
I feel like I've sneakily asked half a question. So before I go any further, I'm going to kick it to Ms. Keitzman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask the speaker if, based on her statements, if there is never a time in which aggression is called for or necessary.
Well, I think of the war in Ukraine, they were invaded and then, how are they to respond? Well, Gandhi said he could have fought Hitler without violence, that he would have chosen a way without violence. Is that really possible? We don't know. It hasn't been tried very much. I mean, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, a lot of people have done a lot of amazing work. So are there times? Perhaps yes. But again, the point is have you used everything possible, and are you managing that aggression so that it doesn't become overly forceful and overly harmful? So you would just use, my Tai Chi master had to fight off 4 guys who were trying to attack him. And he did fight them off. It was easy for him, to be honest with you. I mean, he's an amazing, amazing Tai Chi master, but he did it without harming them more than necessary.
And for a final question, Mr. Gerson.
Yes, hi, thank you. I don't know, does it have to be? I would like to ask Catherine.
Ask the lady, direct your question to me rather than directly to the speaker.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Madam Chair, I would like to know if the husband of the speaker, could you characterize him as being his authentic self? He knew he was, and so forth, as opposed to men's roles are starting to be kind of vague in this arena. But if you know your authentic self and you're a mature person, there's no need necessarily for aggression as such.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gerson. Ms. Dreyer, how would you respond?
I would say yes, and I would say it's been a lifelong study and practice for him. So yes, he had a desire for that. He didn't have a father image. His father was gone at a very early age. And so I would say that it has been an internal practice for him. It is something we grapple with all the time, and that it has been something that he desires and works on it. So yes, I feel like he is becoming more and more himself all the time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dreyer. And one more thank you both to her and to all of our leadoff speakers. And a special thank you to Ms. Dreyer, who could beat me up but chooses not to. And thus I retain my dominance as chair. And now I'd like to open it up to the room. So now we're going to have alternating speeches in the affirmative and the negative, which will be 3 minutes long, followed by 1 to 2 questions to make sure we get as many voices as possible. So please raise your Zoom hand and don't forget to chat to your whip as you are pitching speeches and getting excited. Mr. Marks.
Hello. So when I joined in the affirmative, what I did first was Google the definition of aggression after the fact. I was like, oh, what am I working with here? But then I did see that, yeah, there's a positive to it, just as there's toxic positivity. I do believe there is a positive aspect to aggression. So I look up to a lot of men. So there would be like Malcolm X, like there'll be MLK, Fred Rogers, James Baldwin, but also like Malcolm X, like Huey Newton, and the Black Panthers. So like there is value in asserting oneself in a way that will not back down, in a way that gives grit and balance to a fight that must be fought, where ground cannot be ceded. I also lost my dad at an early age, and as a result, I have looked up to him. He was like a Boy Scout. There's so many aspects that I can aspire to, but and I guess as a result, I've sort of collect father figures and male role models. So I think just as there's a toxic positivity, there can also be positive aggression when controlled, principled, and deliberate. And there's in a sense like when you see a child like there's when you see boys play, there is aggression there sometimes. But the thing is, they have the opportunity to learn, they have the opportunity to play, and to redeem themselves if they overstep. There's also a competition in business. There can be ruthless, cutthroat behaviors in the business sphere. And I think it just comes down to be authentic, be principled, and be deliberate. There is a place for aggression. There's situations where it is unavoidable. It must be controlled. And I just wanted to leave on a quote from Fred Rogers. What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad that you can bite? Some of you might know the rest. So yeah, and I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marks. I would personally very much like to hear Mr. Marks moderate a debate on masculinity between Fred Rogers and Malcolm X. But in lieu of that, I will satisfy myself with a question from the body. Please raise your Zoom hand if you'd like to ask a question. Mr. Saris.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was raising my hand to speak, not to ask a question.
Then make sure, if you'd like to speak, make sure to chat your whip. Your whip is the person whose letter range corresponds with your first name. So hands up for questions specifically right now. Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford, go ahead and unmute to ask your question.
My picture changed on me. But Madam Chair, I would like to ask of the last speaker
Jesus Christ.
if we share the definition of aggression. I've always interpreted aggression as acting first, acting in a hostile manner, or overacting to some provocation, real or imagined. That to me is aggression. A vigorous defense, in my definition, is not aggression. So that I would pose to the last speaker.
So I would say that it's always it is subjective. There were pacifists in World War II that preferred that America not do anything, not intervene in the war that was not their issue to assert themselves in. There's a balance between the war dove, the peace doves and the war hawks, and sometimes you do need to strike when you yeah. So what I would say is that it's it's hard to make the call with as an individual. So there, and when there's a competition between like countries, like if you feel something is being stolen from you, like it's always the definition, like let's say is this land actually this person's land? It can go back generations. It's hard to know what belonged to who first, and there's so many conflicts where it's hard. You cannot tell, or people believe they know that it was the other person who struck first, and I wish it wasn't that way, but I believe that aggression is unavoidable when genuine, authentic conflicts arise.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marks. Hands for our speaker. And now, if folks will lower their Zoom hands, I'm looking for speeches in the negative, speeches opposed to society needs the influence of men's aggression. So please raise your Zoom hand and make sure to chat your whip if you're interested in speaking but haven't chatted yet. All right. speeches in the negative. Did I see a hand for Mr. Dayton? Are you still with us, Mr. Dayton?
Did you say Dayton?
I did. Charles Dayton, it's yours. The floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Okay. I spent my life as a lawyer, and a lot of times in trials, and lawyers have different styles. And one of the things that bothered me was lawyers who were overly aggressive, overly nasty for effect. And I think what they were doing was to try to appeal to their clients who wanted a junkyard dog lawyer. I also worked with a lawyer who was a consummate gentleman. And he was my mentor, and I admired him greatly and thought that his style, which was strong but not nasty, was much more effective, especially with juries. There's a quote from Daniel Webster that civility is not a sign of weakness, it is indeed a sign of true competence. The other thought I had is how different styles might be admired in men, but not in women. For example, a strong, tough lawyer as a male might be viewed as pushy and overbearing as a woman, and that's not fair either. Anyway, that's my thing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dayton. I'll take questions for Mr. Dayton, and just keeping in mind the number of people who want to speak, please make your question as brief and to the point as possible, and your answer to the question as brief and to the point as possible, so that frees up more speaking time for later speakers. So questions. Well, I don't know which of the two people under Kathy Lovrian would like to ask, but whichever of you would like to ask on that Zoom call, please ask.
And you're unmuted. I'm just noticing something tonight that I wanted to talk about anyways, and that's I like to see all the men here tonight. And I definitely am feeling that we are feeling the same thing, is that our roles as what might be deemed a good man or good qualities are have been forgotten and are very vague and misunderstood.
Do you have a question for Mr. Dayton?
I actually I really didn't. I put mine in as a comment.
All right. Well, please make sure.
I was hoping to speak to that concept.
Definitely
at a later time.
I appreciate that. So please chat your whip with ideas for speeches, and I'll just open it up one more time for questions for Mr. Dayton for right now. I will take one question for myself. Oh, you know what? No, I'm going to take it, Mr. Boatwright. Mr. Dayton, I really appreciate your examples of different styles for lawyers. And I'm just curious, is it hard for a lawyer to remain civil and non-aggressive when the stakes are high? If you had a friend defending someone in a death penalty case who they believe to be innocent or even railroaded, would civility be enough, or would your natural, care for justice and your client push you to aggression?
Well, if I found myself getting angry in a trial, I would ask for a recess and go walk around the block, because when the reptilian brain takes over, you can't think well. You do much better if you stay calm and collected. So, I mean, sometimes in court or in negotiations, anger is a tool that is used if it's appropriate at the time. But as a general matter, keeping your wits about you is a lot better.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dayton. I'll call on you to defend me to my boss if I overstep my authority as chair at any point tonight, since it sounds like I'd be lucky to have you on my side.
Thank you.
That having been a fine speech in the negative, I'm now looking for speeches in the affirmative for our resolution. So please raise your Zoom hands and keep them up. See, and remember to chat your whip if you haven't already, if you're interested in speaking, but haven't chatted. Mr. Stein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to start by saying that I have been working on myself. I have spent a lifetime working on myself and my own toxic aggression that I can manifest, because aggression, assertiveness, anger from a man's perspective was modeled to me by men when I was a kid in a toxic way. It was modeled in a toxic way. It was hurting others, etc. And so I've tried very hard to understand whether it's necessary and how to use it effectively. And I think that I'm detecting a pattern with a lot of the speakers today and the questions, that the word aggression is not being defined, or is defined differently by different people, or people have a different idea of what that is. And I think that I define aggression as assertiveness, staking my claim, claiming my ground, and allowing my emotions around it, my anger or whatever it is, to temporarily take over as a necessary step. All right. And in doing so, I am foregoing a thoughtful long-term consequence in exchange for a short-term immediate need. And for example, somebody's breaking into my house. Now, should I call the police? Should I go to the kitchen? Should we hide? Should we run away? I don't have time to think about all the possible consequences. I'm going to let my emotions take over. I might get hurt. I might get shot and killed. This guy might be 6'5". I'm 5'9". I don't care. I've got a baby in the other room. I'm going out there. I'm attacking because somebody's coming into my house. So my aggression is needed in that moment. And I think that's what I think it's important to understand the definition of aggression, and that's my definition of aggression, right? And I believe there's three ways that aggression can manifest. One, well, I use the archetype of the warrior just to talk about the concept. So if I think of a warrior that's going out there sacrificing his own safety for the protection of somebody else or himself or whatever principle, I can be an immature warrior or a mature warrior. And the way I think about it is the overinflated immature warrior will allow the emotions to take over, and they will slash around inadvertently without regard, and may actually end up hurting those that they want to protect. The underinflated warrior will be kind of a doormat, will take the aggression in, let it all in, and then do self-harm or self-blame, and then take their aggression out on themselves. A lot of people end up, committing suicide with things like that. And then finally, the mature warrior will properly execute aggression in a clean way. I know what the target is. I know what's needed. I know what level is needed, and I'm going. And it doesn't have to be a long thought out process. It's an impulse. It's an instinct. However, as society becomes safer and safer, that need for defending from real danger has gone down and down and down. And so I think a lot of men are finding themselves in a place where is my aggression actually needed? So sports takes a big role, joining the military.
Get close to the end here, Mr. Stein, just because of time constraints.
Sure. So I think that aggression executed cleanly and maturely is absolutely still necessary and vital. And there is something that we need to find out to be done as that is necessary less and less as there's more peace and safety in the world.
Thank you so much. A question for Mr. Stein. Ms. Rampona.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wonder if the speaker differentiates between having a persona that is constant of male dominance and superiority. Well, I shouldn't use the word superiority, although it does seem sometimes to go along with that sort of male dominance persona, or whether, as he speaks of changing with the situation, he is able to also show, like, toward the baby and you know, and toward the women and children in his life, a persona, or not even a persona, but just a part of himself, a self that is kind and can encourage and lift up that person.
Absolutely. So I might define aggression as a masculine trait, but not necessarily a only male trait, right? There's aggression and masculinity in women, and that's sometimes necessary. Single moms portray that all the time, for example. And then there's also feminine energy and nurturing energy in men. And absolutely, the warrior is only one archetype that I can go to when necessary, but I also have the lover. I also have the decision maker. I also have the analyzer. I have different parts of me that I can go to. The warrior is only one part, and it's important to know when it's needed and when not. So absolutely, being nurturing, supporting, pushing in a positive way is also very much a part of, well, I'm thinking of fatherhood as an example, and because it sounds like that's what you were thinking about. Absolutely. You know, being the warrior and aggressive isn't the only way to be. It's only when that's necessary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stein. All right. I'm now looking for speeches in the negative, so make sure question hands go up and question hands go down, speech hands go up, and make sure to tap your whip if you have questions or if you want to give a speech. I'll take a speech in the negative from Ms. Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just confirm how 4 minutes, 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here tonight. So I will just jump right into it. I want to touch briefly on a few points that have been brought up in the affirmative of this resolution. And then I also want to bring a new point into this conversation. So first and foremost, we've heard a few different speeches this evening talking about like the importance of teaching young boys and young men in our society these good values and like what it means to be a good man, a real man, an honest man, stuff like that. And honestly, I agree with that entirely. I have an incredible father and I'm so grateful for him in my life. And he is all of those things. We've also talked a lot about, or people have spoken about, you know, competitiveness and strength and assertiveness. Those are all things that I identify with greatly and I think bring a lot to society. You know, it's great to have competitiveness in the society and assertiveness, all of these things. You know, there are also certain instances where we need aggression. You know, if somebody breaks into my apartment, I'm a 23-year-old woman. I'm absolutely going to be aggressive and fight for my life to do whatever I can to save myself. But I think we need to think about this resolution as a whole. And that's society needs the influence of men's aggression. And so when we're talking about aggression within this context, I want to take it back to like, I kind of want to take the 10,000 foot view and move back to talking about society as a whole. And so, you know, thinking about that, I want to think about the impact of men's aggression in society. We have an incredibly prolific and horrific culture of sexual harassment and sexual violence in the United States. It exists worldwide, but in this country, it is absolutely rampant. 1 in 4 women will experience attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. And that is the extreme. That's rape. That's not getting felt up on the bus or under the table at a work event or getting catcalled on the street, having your Uber driver sing you a song because he thinks you're beautiful. That happened to me yesterday. You know, it happens to women every single day. And why, when we start to look at the root of that, it's because we have an unhealthy conception of masculinity. You know, we think about things like the Me Too movement that, you know, became very popular quite a few years ago. that comes out of people being shamed for speaking up about sexual assault or sexual harassment or discrimination that they face. And that again is because we have an unhealthy conception of what masculinity is in our society. You know, instead of teaching young boys and girls, because we should be teaching them the same thing, compassion and empathy and strength and leadership and respect, we're instead questioning survivors when they come forward, asking, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Who were you with? Were you intoxicated? As opposed to actually presenting the values that our society needs. So I know I only have a few seconds left, and so I want to take it back to, circle back. Society doesn't need aggression. There are instances when it's great. If I'm defending myself or in a competitive event, sure, I might be tapping into that, but we don't need it as a value that we're willing to defend in our society, especially a particularly male value.
Thank you so much, Ms. Webb. I'd like to ask for a question for Ms. Webb. I'd like to ask Mr. Presida for a question.
Thank you. Is it Madam Chair?
Madam Chair.
Yes, I would like to ask the speaker, and I understand her concern about violence and sexual violence in particular. You know, she wanted to talk about the broader view, but then went right back to what are kind of personal views. And I understand the concern with antisocial behavior, and that antisocial behavior can be perceived as masculine or aggressive. It is aggressive, but I'd like her to be honest with me in this question, and it's a twofold question. The first is,
I'm going to have to ask you to make it a one-fold question in the
well,
interest
I think I need to make it two. It's very simple
Mr.
question.
Presida, I'm going to have to ask you to make it one-fold, or I'm going to have to call on a different speaker.
I'll answer quickly, Leah.
Ms. Webb, I've got to hold everyone to the same. So
What are
just a single point
what
of
are you
question.
attracted to? What do you want to have sex with? A masculine, aggressive man, or an effeminate and passive man?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that very personal question.
Ms. Wu, I'm going to reframe it a little bit. I think the question can be taken a little less personally to.
But that takes a broader connection.
Mr. Presida, just because we do want to examine each other's ideas and not cross-examine each other as personally. And I understand what Mr. Presida is trying to ask. I'm going to rephrase it for Ms. Webb as, what does she think characterizes women's preferences in men, and how does she feel about those preferences?
Well, I personally cannot speak to women's preferences on men because everybody has their own preferences. So I can only speak to my own unique preferences. Mr. Presida, I would say my preference is to have sex with somebody that cares about me, that loves me, and that can make me finish. And to be honest, most men can't.
All right. This having been the slightly I'm glad my children are already asleep portion of the debate. We're also we're about at the halfway mark. So as everyone's blood is running a little hotter or people are feeling a little spicier, I'd encourage you to take a second and stretch if you've been in your chair on Zoom for quite some time. Right now, as far as I can tell, I'm the only one stretching, which means I'm the only one been. Okay, there we go. And I do want to say, please be careful in terms of how personally you direct questions, but I understand why Mr. Presida is curious, and I appreciate Ms. Webb's answer, because I think we're debating something that's both kind of an intensely societal thing, how do we feel these things play out in the aggregate, and an intensely personal thing. How is this shaping our relationships with specific people in our lives? So be thoughtful about how you frame these questions, but understand why this is a debate that, more than a debate about tax rates, kind of touches on the most intimate parts of our lives, who we love and who we want to be. So that having been a stretch, I'm going to take another speech, this time in the affirmative. So hands down from questions, hands up for speeches. All right, everyone flip-flopping those now for a second. All right, Mr. Harding, 3 minutes.
You're muted.
Mr. Harding, you are muted.
Yes, I am a martial arts self-defense instructor, and
I've been in the industry for about 50 years, so I have a lot to say, but little time to say it. So I'll go right to this story. I like what this veteran, this Vietnam veteran said. He made up this, well, this is a very interesting story, real quickly, that most people in our society are sheep. We have three types of people in society: the sheep, the wolves, and the sheep dogs. I mean, I suppose everybody loves dogs. I love dogs, so I can use that analogy. And most people in our society are sheep. They're kind of gentle, and they're kind, and they don't mean to hurt anybody, and even by accident they would be sorry. But then there's the wolf. These wolves feed on sheep, and they are evil men who do things, and they harm people with no cause, no reason whatsoever. Then you have the sheep dog. They live to protect the flock and confront the evil wolf. So those are the three types of people that I think we're talking about, the three types of character. Now, the sheep generally are hated by, in other words, they generally hate the sheep dogs, because sheep dogs are just like the wolves. In one sense, they are violent, and they appear to be violent. But then the difference is that the sheep dog does not harm the sheep. They protect the sheep. I'll give you a quick example. I've been told before, when I became a Christian, as a Christian, many of the Christians told me, well, you have to be passive. You cannot practice martial arts. You can't do that and be a Christian, because Jesus was a pacifist. Well, if you know the Bible, there are quite a few incidences of violence in the Bible, a lot. And so that's why I say the sheep generally despise the sheep dog until something happens where the sheep will have to hide behind the sheep dog and depend on the sheep dog to protect them. And I think that's a good thing in our society. So there is a way of training yourself to be like the sheep dog. So that is my contention. I am a sheep dog. And the world itself, if you think about it, the world, our constitutional republic, is more like the sheep dog. I mean, the founders, the amazing founding fathers of our country were like the sheep dogs. They protected, they protected the people, the Americans. And they gave us a republic, a constitutional republic, where you could exercise your natural right to self-defense. Notice I said it's a natural right. It's not a government given right. It's a natural right. That's what the Second Amendment is about.
All right,
so,
Mr. Harding, I mean, in defense of the time limit, I'm going to ask you to bring it to a conclusion.
Okay, I'll just say it, you can write it down. The Constitution, the US Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, and Article 4, Section 4, they talk about that very thing, what the president is ordained to do by the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harding. I certainly see myself as a sheepdog of the debate, but I will now pass it over to questions for this topology. Questions for Mr. Harding? Let's see. I'm just looking to see if there are hands I haven't seen, and otherwise I'm happy to go with some of the ones I have. Ms. Wright.
There was a specific example that I was thinking of when you talked about men defending women or others that are in peril. And I was thinking about the incident that happened at the Oscars between Will Smith and Chris Rock. And I'm wondering, in that situation where it was perfectly understandable that Will Smith would want to defend his wife, as any man would want to defend their husband, or any man would want to defend their wife, was there another choice that he could have made in that moment other than what he did?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, there is another response. As a trainer, as I said before, I teach people how to defend themselves against such things. A slap is not that big of a deal. I mean, it's not like he took a knife and tried to slash his throat, but he used the hand. So all he had to do, if he was trained properly, Chris could have taken a few lessons from me. I'd have shown him how to redirect that. He could have ducked. He could have turned the other cheek.
And
I'm
we've been
actually going to pause because I want to make sure I'm re-emphasizing Ms. Wright's question. I believe she's asking what advice you would give to Mr. Smith, who was trying to be a sheepdog in defense of his wife. So
Oh, I see.
was
Yeah.
he doing a good job there? What should he have done?
Well, negative on that sense. He was the aggressor, and aggressors are not sheepdogs. Aggressors are wolves, but the sheepdog will use the aggression of the wolf against them and kill the wolf when necessary, if he's justified. Does that make sense?
It does, Mr. Harding. I think our challenge is, as the French expression puts it, which I recently learned, that there is an hour, they've named the twilight hours, the hour between dog and wolf, when exactly who is the dog and who is the wolf is difficult to discern. But I very much appreciated your shared parsing of that Oscars moment. I appreciate concrete worked examples. That having been a fine speech in the affirmative, I will now take a speech in the negative. So those question hands go down. Speech hands go up, and remember to chat your whip based on your first name. Mr. Malpou. And please correct me if I butchered that after just citing a French example, but not in French.
Mopou.
Mr. Mopou.
Thanks. 3 minutes, merci. Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the idea that's been kicking around about certain traits being inherent to maleness and certain traits being inherent to femaleness. I've definitely had the experience as a father of a 6-year-old, getting to know a lot of other kids, friends who have kids similar ages, that there are, kind of statistically speaking, there are definitely some traits that are more common among boys versus other traits that are more common among boys. Practically every young boy, little boy I know is very much into trucks, and I don't really know too many girls who are into trucks. And that's the experience that I've been exposed to. And but I think where we get hung up as a society is taking the next step from observing some of those tendencies and then deciding that that is how boys or girls are supposed to be. And I think, I imagine most of us here can agree that, you know, if a boy is offered a toy truck and he says, I don't really want that, I want to play with dolls, it would be wrong to say, no, you're not allowed to have that doll, you're going to play with this truck because you're a boy and that's what boys do. And I think where we are now, I think we're in a place where we've gone through many generations of boys being taught that they are supposed to act within these specific guidelines. And while that might fit for many boys, it doesn't always fit for everybody. Same for girls. But on the subject of what we're talking about, I think where we end up with a lot of what we see and what we discuss when we talk about what is toxic masculinity, I think a lot of that comes from a place of men. I'm not sure if am I still on?
I can still hear you. I'm just missing your video.
Okay. Oh, my battery's running low. So, okay. Sorry about that. I think a lot of that comes from a place of men trying to live up to something that they've been told they have to be, or else they are not men. And I think if we could just as a society get more comfortable accepting children and grown-ups as who they naturally are and what they naturally gravitate towards, we could, we would just be in a much better place.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mopou. And keeping in mind that his battery is actively dying, please raise your hand. You have a very brief, cogent question so that he can make best use of his limited time before collapse.
Okay.
Oh, he's back for now.
I'm back for now.
All right. For a brief question, Mr. Shinazi?
No, I raised my hand for a speech, not a comment.
All right. For a brief question, Mr. Lerner. Make sure you're unmuted.
There are two kinds of aggression. One is physical, which relates to men, and one is mental, that relates to women. So many men suffer from aggression, mental aggression for women that treat them like a junk or whatever. So aggression is not necessarily physical.
Mr. Lerner,
The
just to check,
mental
is this
aggression
a question? Is this a question for our speaker specifically, or
Yeah.
a speech on the topic?
Because I missed the beginning. That means the progress is so fast that one subject being covered so many layers before you have chance to talk. So I talk about aggression, and I say aggression can be physical and mental. And mental can be as damaging as physical. That's all.
All right. How would you respond? Do you find this to be a helpful distinction, Mr. Mapu, in terms of how we think about aggression and gender? And I believe Mr. Lerner is framing this as women are more tilted towards mental aggression and men more towards physical confrontation.
I mean, anecdotally, I mean, I'm sure there are anecdotes that could point that way. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I see much benefit in defining that one gender receives or expresses aggression one way versus the other. I think
I'll offer a brief clarification, or if there are broad tendencies by gender, even if any particular young man or any particular young woman may differ in those tendencies, is it helpful to give boys and girls separate education about the challenges they're most likely to face in the same way we give them broad introductions to puberty?
Yeah, actually, yes. When phrased like that, I think, I mean, I think there's benefit to, sort of expression to a topic that might impact boys more than girls and vice versa. So yeah, similar to how we teach sex ed in schools, I think that does make sense to introduce concepts in that way. I think it also makes sense to also have a co-ed approach. But I think both approaches make a lot of sense, and I think could work well in tandem.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mapu. All right. And just to give folks a heads up, we're getting closer to the formal end of our debate. So just so people know, we're going to take a few more speeches. Feel free to chat your whip based on your first name if you'd like to speak. And then after the formal part of our debate, there will be a debrief, or there'll be a little more time for brief reflections and reactions, both in the chat and on video. So if you're someone who's thinking about things but don't have a speech, you may have a chance to share that there. But for right now, that having been a speech in the negative, I'd like to ask for speeches in the affirmative. Please raise your hand. All right, Mr. Brown, if you would go 3 minutes.
Okay, let me start this timer. Basically, to summarize, I think we should make a distinction between aggression and anger. Aggression is a tactic. It's just simply taking a hostile or initiative approach. It doesn't necessarily promote anger necessarily. And it's not necessarily inherently bad depending on the context. With that said, if we're talking about how we teach men aggression, I think we need to address some of the key core components of our gender dynamics that help explain a lot of those expressions. First of all, we don't really teach men a lot about emotional intelligence or emotional maturity. And part of that reason is due to the fact that being emotionally expressive as a man can be very self-destructive, which is primarily why we don't express it. It's very hard to be emotionally soft when you're going to be either exploited by men or women of being soft. So there is a reasoning behind some of the quote unquote toxic masculine behaviors. Second, the aggression is way more rewarded than being less aggressive. If you're dealing with a hostile as a woman, there's a strong possibility that you can ask for help. Doesn't necessarily mean you will get it, but there is at least an understanding that there should at least be a priority in your safety. Considering men have a higher level of suicide rates and a higher level of being killed, we have a higher death rate and even lower life expectancy. And we still have a discussion about not to devalue it. We still have a higher priority over women's safety. There is a sense that men's value in society is secondary to women's in that sense, because it's assumed that we'll just protect ourselves and preserve ourselves, which just promotes us being aggressive. Because if you're dealing with a hostile and you know nobody's going to protect you, there's not really an incentive not to be aggressive. Also, in our dating dynamics, there is no expectation for women to approach us, mostly because there is also the dynamic that they could be afraid of us being hostiles ourselves. But if we want to engage in a relationship or even participate in friendships, you'll have to take an aggressive approach and actually approach people. Now, that means you're actually invading people's space in order to talk to them, which some will welcome it and others will consider it harassment. And people's reaction to how you experience that will also be different. Like Will Smith, for example, was experiencing a large amount of harassment over his wife's affair over the red table. He was probably going through an emotional, destructive response. But to conclude, men's aggression is not monopolized. We don't have a monopoly on anger, and we don't have a monopoly on aggression. We just express it because we have legitimate reasons why we do it, and there are legitimate reasons why we don't express it in other ways. And it's very difficult to convince men to stop when there's not much incentive to do so, but more punishments for doing so. I have more to say, but I'm kind of out of time. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Applause hands for Mr. Brown. For a question, Ms. Fathom.
Mr. Brown, could you tell us what happens when men violate the rules about when men express emotion? Can you elaborate or talk about what happens when men do that, like across the different spectrums?
Could you maybe firm up your question a little bit, Ms. Fathom?
Well, Mr. Brown was talking about the societal expectations of men and what happens when they express emotions, and how it got implied that doesn't always work out the greatest. And I've also had this experience where it goes across a spectrum of either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement for different reasons, and the impacts along those lines vary greatly. And I know this is a very broad question, but I'm trying to get another guy to talk about this more openly. I hear some men talk about this, but not as much. And I just think that this would be very helpful to people.
Thank you so much. Mr. Brown, can you help out?
Yeah, I could answer that. I can give an example. Like, for example, if I were to talk about my feelings of discomfort with somebody, and if I were to express a disdain for them, because of legitimate reason, for example, bullying. For example, if I was getting bullied in a high school setting, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, and they went to a teacher, it may be written off as juvenile, and that would be okay in that context because they're kids. Harassment is a thing. kids sometimes don't act out and they really develop very well, so they can express acts of aggression, and kids do that. The problem is that behavior, if you take that same childish behavior, let's say a wedgie, for example, and you put it in an adult context, that would constitute a sexual assault. And we expect children to have the emotional maturity to be their rage in order to make school as an institution, but it can expand beyond that, as amicable and socially productive behaviors. When in reality, if you apply the exact same behaviors in a school context, in an adult context, that would lead to violence. People would start shooting each other. If I just walked up to you and like randomly and just grabbed you by your underwear and forced it over your head, you'd be traumatized. And if you're a man, you probably respond very violently. And if I could do this to you repeatedly,
I think just let's avoid you, especially as we explore scenarios of potential violence.
Understood.
Mhm.
My point is, men are violent when we don't feel safe. Not everyone, obviously. Some men love power and some people abuse it, but abuse and aggression are not the same thing. The Me Too movement is an example of aggression, but that doesn't necessarily, and I would even go a step further and say it came from a place of anger. Not necessarily unjustified anger, but it came from a place of harm. There was a large significance of injustice, and that promoted an emotion of anger. And when it was institutionally explored, it was widespread, and people were realizing that an act of injustice in one individual case had been repeated to such a significant degree that it was starting to become, if it had not already, became systemic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. I'm just going to pause you here because I take the point and I appreciate the analogy. I just want to make sure, keeping an eye on the time, that we get to other speakers, but thank you so much. And Ms. Fathom, thank you for that question. I've really noticed a pattern this evening on both sides, and this is kind of reflecting the distribution of speeches we've been having people chat to whips about, of men speaking and women being more represented in questions. And I appreciated your question, Ms. Fathom, and your answer, Mr. Brown, because I think there's this sense of how alien are we to each other? And I've appreciated the ways folks have been exploring that. That having been a speech in the affirmative, I'd like to ask the question hands to go down and the negative speech hands to go up. All right, Ms. Velasquez.
Seeing how we're coming to the end, Madam Chairperson, I've been making a lot of notes as we've been going along, and would like to respond to a lot of what I've been hearing. I think up until the last 100, 200 years, we lived with a biological imperative in which manhood was defined as strength. Strength to master others, strength to master the world. Let me show you I can lift more. Let me show you I can carry more. Let me show you I can run faster. Let me show you I can work longer than others. And that's going to make me a man. Can we subdue another person physically? Then we're a stronger man. We idolize the Clint Eastwood characters. We idolize the John Wayne characters, their toughness, their willingness to fight and be dominant. But I think it's important to make the distinction between being a man and being male. Being male is part of our biological coding, not mine, but men. And it was necessary at one time for survival to be all those things I just mentioned. But being a man today in 2021 or 2023 rather, is something very different. It's taking those male traits and forming them into a life that meets the demands of the world around him while serving the needs of others, as some of you have said. The world today, even though they seem to be excited about and crave the strength and the toughness of the Clint Eastwood characters, we don't need that version of maleness. We are no longer locked into some sort of survival where we must turn force against counterforce in a battle that's physical. We're looking for more greatness of spirit than we need greatness of physical strength. We need more true men, not just males. And especially for a lot of men that are growing older, they grew up in a world where the value of a man depended upon his maleness. And as they get older, they begin to feel useless because they can no longer be strong, they can no longer dominate, they can't win competitions. But there's this new generation of men coming forward that are looking at different challenges that can't be solved by might alone. And these challenges require a man to not tie himself so closely to the aggressiveness of the male DNA. They need to show new ways of strength, new ways of mastery and exhibiting courage. And it's not an issue of being masculine or effeminate. It's not an either or. And I was thinking about Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan as an example. Tom Hanks was a hero in that movie, but he was not the same kind of hero that Clint Eastwood was. He was not the kind of hero that would go challenge somebody and say, come on, make my day. He was a reluctant warrior. He knew what had to be done. He did it, but he didn't do it out of a sense of aggressiveness. He did it out of a sense of duty to his country and to humankind. And thank you. That's what I think we need today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Velasquez. I'd like to ask for questions as well as applause hands for Ms. Velasquez. And thank you for that nice example from Saving Private Ryan. I'm going to go, looking at my hands, with Mr. Ulmer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess the question in part for this speaker would be, if you think you're going to change something culturally, when you've admitted that it's biologically driven, that aggression, that violence, movies aside, having spent a lot of time working around operators in the military, these are not just aggressive men. These are absolutely violent men. These are, I'm not just talking about anybody in the military. I'm talking about people who were actually doing the very violent work of war. So there still apparently is a need for that. And the other speakers have touched on it. The question is really, how do you get the discipline, the control, and the dominance early on in life so that that person grows up to be an honorable, contributing person to society? But I just don't understand how the speaker thinks, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of biologically driven DNA imperatives are just going to be driven out of some people, because we see what's happening. Without that control, the discipline when you're young, you end up with all these people that are just nuts.
Thank you, Mr. Ulmer. So, Ms. Velasquez, if you think there is this biological push, but it's not necessarily still required, what do you plan to do about it?
We are not the sum total of our biological makeup. We are perhaps predisposed to certain things, but we certainly have the ability to learn, to grow, and to control if we see the need to do so. And the society today is changing. But it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen in just one generation. Just like the role of women has vastly changed in the last 100 years. It didn't happen overnight, nor will the need for men to feel like they've got to be this manly man in order to be worthy. Will that go away overnight? But we no longer have that need in our world anymore. We need people that can compromise, people that can work together for the common good and not bully, not put people down to make themselves look strong and tough.
Thank you so much, Ms. Velasquez. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and hands for Ms. Velasquez. That was a very nice way to close what is the close of our formal part of the debate. So let me tell you guys what's coming next. I want to turn things over to my colleague, Cynthia O'Brien, for a moment, just to tell you about some other things coming up at Braver Angels. And then I want to turn it back over to the room And after Cynthia, we're going to open the chat, where I'd like people to take a moment to reflect on the debate, because, as I said, the goal is fruitful conflict. The debate is meant to be fruitful conflict, but we want time to reflect on what people have learned. So after Cynthia's brief pitch, I want to open the chat and hear from people what you learned, what you enjoyed or what surprised you. Now, just to be clear, the chat is not going to be a place to continue giving speeches. So they should be brief comments. I may call on people to give them out loud as they go. But something you learned, something you enjoyed, something that surprised you, something you're thinking about. And just for this debate, when we open the chat, feel free to also share the name of someone you think is an exemplar of a good man, but it has to just be the name, because we can't have further speeches in the chat. I just would really enjoy that. So without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Cynthia for a moment to talk about what's coming up next, and how you can be engaged with Braver Angels past this debate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Cynthia O'Brien. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and what a great conversation. Thank you, everybody. So if you are concerned about the rancor that's tearing our country apart, if you believe that your opponent should not be your enemy, if you believe that America's best days can be ahead of us, I would like you to come and join me in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, not to shoot at each other, but for the Braver Angels National Convention. It's going to be July 5th through the 8th. We'll have delegates come from all over the country. We will also have representatives from partner organizations, because we are no longer just an organization or a place to get training. We are a movement. So I'm very excited. This is our third national convention, and I've been to the other two, and it was really a great time. We stay in dorms at Gettysburg College. We eat our meals together. You have access to gym, all kinds of workshops, plenaries, debates, opportunities to just have fun, music. We're going to have a house band this year named Gangsta Grass. They are an American bluegrass hip hop band, and I think you're really going to love them, as well as the Braver Angels music team. So you'll be able to connect with others. We'll be able to increase our skills. We'll take deep dives into issues, and we're going to come together to form our shared vision for going forward. So stand up for America, come to Gettysburg.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And if you'd like to join us before Gettysburg, our debate next month is going to actually be a little more of a debate about Braver Angels as we kind of gear up for that big rally in Gettysburg. So next month, in some ways, you could see this as a continuation of our debate today. Next month's debate is resolved. Braver Angels should focus on creating better fights, not harmony. That'll be on June 15th. And in some sense, you can view it as aggression, not just for men, is Braver Angels aggression needed as an influence on society? Feel free to come to it as a sequel, but we're going to be debating what it means to kind of engage with each other and what's the best approach to bridging those divides. I'm really excited for it. As you can tell, I enjoy fights, better fights, a great deal. But now what I'd like to do is to open up the chat for a moment so that people can share a little bit, whether you spoke or asked a question or not. Let us know what you learned or what you enjoyed during this debate. And just as a bonus for this debate in particular, feel free to share the name of a man who you think really embodies what you'd like to see as a vision of positive masculinity. Oh man, Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know how many people in this room are excited, but I am excited about that. And I may call in a couple people to share their chat things out loud, but these are just brief reflections on the debate. Let's see. I see Abraham Lincoln tying very well into our trip to Gettysburg. George Washington. All right. Mr. Rogers, Thomas Jefferson. Anything else of things people learned or what they enjoyed from being at this debate, or of the particular men that you see as a good example? Oh, I see Monica saying liked hearing the men grapple with this question as they related to their personal backstories. I'll second that. I feel like I really got to eavesdrop on conversations I'm naturally not a part of. LeVar Burton. I see Beth saying, that there's a lot of difference in what people are thinking about an aggression. And the questions about what society needs or authentic masculinity. Thank you for that, Beth. I see someone's grandfather, Colleen's grandfather, Ken Burns, interesting. Anything else that things people particularly appreciated? I see fathers, I see son-in-laws. Perhaps I have biased everyone because it is hard to resist telling us about the men you admire most. But if anyone else has something they want to mention about the things that like Beth Sadie says she liked the questions that people illustrated, the ways questioners drew out and illustrated the point speakers were making. Actually, Kirsten, would you unmute to share yours just because I didn't know that and that's interesting. Kirsten D specifically, who is just in the,
Yes.
Go for
Yes,
it.
I love Brene Brown, and she in one of her, I think it was in a TED talk or interview, I'm not sure, she said that when she was first researching vulnerability, she was only interviewing women, and it was a man in one of her audiences that was like, hey, and I think he said something like, first of all, why didn't you collect data from us? And she was just floored, realizing that that was a big problem in her research and data. And then he said, you women always expect us to be on the big white horse, the hero, invulnerable. And I really feel that most of the women in my life never really want me to show vulnerability. And that's sort of what I was hearing in tonight's talk from some of the men, is there's a conflict there that women want men to be more vulnerable, but do they, when they see it, do they really realize that they have a lot of prejudice and innate expectations that are harmful to men?
And Aaron, thank you so much, Kirsten. And Aaron, if you'd unmute, I really appreciated your comment you just put in the chat, if you'd like to share it with the whole crew.
Sure. Hi, all. Thanks for those who are still on, and thanks to Madam Chair and the other Bravery Angels volunteers for being here. I think we heard obviously in the binary sort of affirmative versus in the negative for the resolution. We heard extreme examples of how aggression might manifest itself, and whether it is the sort of leading foot, I guess, men put into the world being a healthy thing, which I would argue it's not, or at least not if it's the only model that's out there. And I think there were a number of speakers that hit on it, but we need a range of models of both aggression and non-aggressive male behavior. And so I think a part two to the debate is not answering a resolution, but more deciding or deliberating on the point of who is actually equipped. Who of us, does it have to be only men? Can it also be women? Who are the people actually equipped to model both both aggressive and non-aggressive forms of healthier masculinity? Anyway,
thank you so much, Aaron.
There's a lot there. Sure.
And I want to just highlight Kathy's comment that she thought with every male example of aggression, she could think of a female equivalent from her experience. And I really appreciate the way people are sifting this back and forth. I also, Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, I'm appreciating folks' examples. I've seen more documentarians than I expected, who I just think of as less visible exemplars of anything because they turn the lens outward. So I'm enjoying that. Any further comments in the chat of things you particularly enjoyed or things you learned from this debate? I think Mr. Rogers is the plurality choice so far. Zelensky is an interesting example of aggression in some sense. Mr. Dannenfelser, do you want to tell us something you learned or something you enjoyed?
I really enjoyed this conversation tonight, and in preparing for it, I went to the dictionary and found the first two definitions of the word aggression was hostile or violent behavior or attitude, becoming excessive with all-consuming emotions. And the other definition is an action violating by force the rights of another. So I think the question that we should have presented was, does society need more of the influence of men's masculinity? Because masculinity is defined by strength, courage, independence, and assertiveness. Assertiveness is the word we're looking for. And when it's not selfish, when it's done to protect and to help other people, then certainly that's the best a man can do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dannenfelser. All right, I'm going to take us a few more moments for debrief, and I'll just remind you guys that you can join us again in June for further debates about how best to navigate conflict and the role of assertiveness versus receptiveness. Or you can join us, or you can join us in Gettysburg, at which point everyone can kind of test some of the things discussed here about how just the presence of others brings out our desire to protect, our desire to defend ourselves. I really like that Brave for Angels puts us in challenging positions and then gives us the skills to navigate those challenges successfully, hopefully. And I think one of the great things about getting together in person in Gettysburg is we all get to meet people who are engaged in this project of how do we navigate these challenging situations that call for possibly assertiveness, possibly aggressiveness well. And we get to practice the skills concretely before we practice them unexpectedly with other folks who are rooting for us. All right, I'll take one comment from either Susan or Jim Mazik, or possibly collaborating together. Make sure you unmute together.
So it's Maziak, and yeah, we're here in Austin, Texas. So I thought the whole discussion was very interesting. We took notes while people were talking to the speakers. It appears that men are stuck with their DNA over thousands of years. However, it appears that the point is, and several people mentioned this, that men need to be situational in their response, and whether it's protecting the front door from the saber-toothed tiger, or being vulnerable to your wife and comforting her when she needs it. So the answer is it depends. There's no right answer that covers all situations. So I guess in hearing several of the speakers speak to that issue, men have the flexibility to respond as needed, and the strength when required, but maybe need more of the vulnerability that some people mentioned.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maziak. And I'll just mention, I feel like aside from some of the gender patterns I saw in speakers versus questioners, I also feel like I saw more pairs of people in different Zoom rooms. And I really enjoyed that, especially for this debate. I think I saw more husband and wife pairs attending when I looked through the screens. And I'd always love to see at our debates multiple people on a couch, whether it's your spouse and you come to debate this together and continue the conversation, or whether you invite a roommate or a friend over. It's really fun to get to continue these conversations in person. And if you can't join us in Gettysburg, please invite someone to just sit on your couch with you for the next debate, and you guys can keep debating and keep discussing together. So I've really enjoyed that. We've got our evaluation link in the side, so if you want to give us your feedback on this debate. And if you're interested in becoming a member, we have a link for us here, or just other ways to get involved with Brave for Angels. We have a lot of ways we tangle with these questions. I would say we don't span the full range from Aikido to Krav Maga. We go from Aikido to something maybe at most a third of the way towards Krav Maga, to draw on one of our earlier speakers, but we have a lot of different ways to engage when you find yourself in a challenging situation because of our political divisions. I'd love to see you at a future debate or a workshop or in Gettysburg. And for now, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for giving part of your night to this discussion, for your questions and your speeches.